Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. It's Spawn Daily, here to talk about Spawn number 19. And I gotta say, I mean, no matter what the issue was that followed the end of Grant Morrison's run, it probably was going to be, less exciting, less successful, just plain not as good. With 18 maybe being arguably the best issue that we've had so far.
Yeah.
Interesting choices that Todd makes, right? Like you. So let me give the creative team first, and then I'll talk a little more about it. So the story is written by Tom Orzechowski and Andrew Grossberg, maybe. Greg Capullo does the pencils. The inks are by Mark Pennington. The letters are also by Tom Orzechowski, and we have colors by Steve Oliff. So that's right. The letterer is writing the comic. Now, Tom Orzechowski's been a letterer for a long time. He still letters to this day. But I don't think he had ever written anything before. And not to say that this isn't, a quality comic. It isn't, worthy of being on the stands. But is it up to Grant Morrison, like level of quality? No, it's not. It's not even close. So I don't. I'm not trying to come down on Tom Orzechowski, but like I just question the decision McFarlane made to go from one of the greatest comic writers, arguably. I'm not, and I say that as somebody who's not the biggest fan of Morrison, but you go from one of the greatest comic writers to giving a guy his first shot at writing a comic ever. And Andrew Grossberg, or Drew Grossberg, from what because I hadn't heard the name, I'm like, is this guy somebody who's done comics? So I went and I did some research. He's like a filmmaker, he's a director, he's a producer, he's a photographer. He's more in that side of things. I don't know if he wanted to dabble in comics or if Todd was trying to network and get some Hollywood cred or what have you. But basically you got two guys who've never written a comic before. At least Orzechowski's been involved in making comics, and you would think after all these years of lettering, knows how to pace a story and whatnot. So again, like technically it's not a terrible comic, but going from the excitement and really the perfect pacing and the impact, the emotionality that we got in the Morrison issues to this, it's very shocking to me, the difference in quality. Again, not to say it's bad, and Greg Capullo's art is fantastic, like it's been throughout ever since he jumped on the title. But yeah, I mean, and again, I wasn't disappointed because I didn't really have expectations, but I don't think McFarlane did Orzechowski any favors by letting him do this. And I did look to see what other stuff Orzechowski's written. So he writes this issue of Spawn 19 and then also 20, and then that's basically it. The guy hasn't written anything since. So maybe it was just like an experiment. He tried it, didn't really like it. Like, who knows? But I question the decision to go from Grant Morrison to a first, letting the guy write his first comic ever. So I don't know. I mean, did you think it
Well,
was good? Okay, I mean, what were your thoughts?
well, I will say it was hearing you say that about this because I'd never heard of this guy before. Orzechowski.
Yeah.
So I was actually going to inquire. Uh, like it's certainly not the worst thing I've ever read. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, it's actually I even like. The dialogue is, I think, it's not bad. It's better than Bendis dialogue. I didn't mind it. I'm actually surprised if this was his first time writing a comic. I think he did a reasonably competent job. But I mean, it is. You can definitely tell it's a decided shift from the previous three issues that we read under Grant Morrison, and but I think but I'll give him some compliments here. I kind of like the way I like the way he scripted at least one of the characters in here, Harry Houdini of all people, and I I thought this was a I was interested in it. I really liked that Harry Houdini plays a role in this issue, and it totally threw me for a loop. I had no, again, McFarlane, we've talked about before how he goes from all these bigger name writers, and now we have a less, literally a first time writer by the sounds of things, who's normally a letterer. Um, wow, it's interesting sort of choice for his Spawn comic, and yet I remain intrigued, and again, this might be a newer writer, but he still manages to contribute to the mythology of Spawn in a way that I think enhances it and keeps me intrigued.
Yeah, and again, we don't know how much Orzechowski wrote, how much Grossberg wrote. I wonder if either of them, maybe both. My gut instinct would be it's Grossberg that's probably the big Harry Houdini fan, just because he is involved in more in the entertainment Hollywood side of things. Um, but who knows? It is an interesting choice to bring Houdini in and the things they do with them. Um, but yeah, I mean, you want to talk about heavy exposition? Maybe it's maybe it's or you would think if the roles were reversed, right? I would say it's Orzechowski getting revenge, and by that I mean McFarlane writes his heavily expositional comics, and Orzechowski has to. At the time, he probably was hand lettering all of this, so you would think, okay, Todd, now it's my turn on issue 19. I'm gonna write it, and you're gonna letter it,
Yeah.
and so it's getting a little revenge. You do the heavy lifting now, but Orzechowski is still lettering it, so you would think that he would be less inclined to be so exposition heavy, and
Yeah.
yet this is as exposition heavy as any McFarlane issue is. Um, so anyway, we'll dive into the story, and I'll point it out where it kind of was noticeable to me a couple of times. So it starts off, and we're seeing a flashback of Harry Houdini doing one of his famous escape acts, where he's in a straitjacket, he's got chains, he's got manacles, he's in a trunk, he gets dipped underwater. Meanwhile, we learn a little bit about um, some context of Nagasaki, Japan, before the bomb was dropped, and apparently there were some demons, and we know that Hitler was very into the occult and was doing research and whatnot, and so um, these demons in this world or this area we come to learn as the overlap were actually watching when the bomb was dropped, because they didn't know what was going to happen. So they found this window, and they're watching as the bomb falls, because they wanted to know if the Earthians, as they called them, now that they have this bomb, if the atomic event, if those high charge energy particles would affect infernal matter at all, like apparently matter that Hellspawn, kind of like the psychoplasm that we were talking about. Um, but it was determined that neither the blast force nor the heat can really phase a hell creature, or so they thought. But they are still thinking. It looks like there's a little bit of fallout, maybe a little bit of effect, although they didn't expect it. So they said this merits further investigation, but there's no real urgency. Find out when you can. So okay, for some reason, this place, this overlap, this dimension where some demons live that seems to be outside of heaven, outside of hell, are curious whether the atomic bomb will affect them at some point. Okay, I guess knowledge is good, but it's part of the. It's not really explained
Yeah.
that
Well, plus
well.
just to expand on that, I mean, we learned last issue, it was established in the previous story by Morrison, that it was in uh, after Nagasaki, many years later. It was during the Nevada underground nuclear testing that Jason Wynn discovered hell. I mean, that's usually how they discovered hell. So we know that in the future, well after this second, this atomic bomb on Nagasaki, we know that underground nuclear testing at Nevada led to the discovery of hell, and where ultimately leading to Jason Wynn making that deal with uh, some agent of hell to trade Al Simmons for psychoplasm. So I'm curious as to why, apparently an underground nuclear blast managed to get some channel into hell, but this maybe it's because this nuclear blast wasn't underground. Maybe that's the difference. Why this one never
Yeah,
didn't
maybe.
seem.
Yeah, maybe it just wasn't close enough. So,
Yeah.
but we're still in. We move forward in the story a few years, but we're still in the past, somewhere in the Soviet Union several years ago, and we see Al Simmons is there, and he's been assigned to take out somebody named Yusuf Volokov. And while he's there, just about to assassinate him, all of a sudden, Russian agents start shooting at him. He doesn't get a chance to take a shot. We're not given any more context than that, other than he was, you know, on his perch in his cool kill spot. He had the guy in his sights, and then all of a sudden, somehow the Russians find him, and they're shooting at him, and um, it looks like he manages to escape. But then all of a sudden, when he breaks through into some sort of safe house, I guess there's somebody there that puts a gun to his head, and then it just changes. Like the scene just changes, and then all of a sudden we're in the Bowery, New York City, 5:10 a.m. We're in Spawn's usual location, what he considers home, and it's a nightmare. So Al Simmons waking up from this nightmare of somebody holding a gun to his head, for some reason remembering that event when he was tasked with killing Yusuf, um, who we don't know anything about. Yusuf Volokov, who we don't know, is he a politician? Is he a scientist? Is he an oligarch? Like we have no idea. But when Simmons wakes up, partly due to either the excitement of the dream or because somebody's pushed a cart full of bottles right next to his body, as he's wondering, what's going on, the shopping cart full of bottles all of a sudden explodes, and some kid goes running off, and Spawn, wakes up, goes running after him, saying, "You're meat," and the kid's like, "Oh, it was just a pile of rags. Bums don't dress in those colors." So I wasn't quite clear on that either, because later we find out this kid is out to get bums, doesn't like bums hanging around, wants to blow them all up. So, but he thought it was a pile of rags and it wasn't a bum there. So, are you trying to hurt? Were you trying to hurt a bum, or were you not trying to, like? You said it was. You thought it was a pile of rags. Like, it didn't make sense to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it was later clearly meant that he's. I mean, I was initially confused too, but I think later on it's meant to clearly establish, at least later on by the end, that this kid is actually, he's literally trying to murder homeless people that are hanging out near his mom's place and his dad's place. And again, it's funny. I mean, I mean, I sound like we both sound like broken records. We talk about the lack of subtlety in this comic. I mean, that the bad guys are. I mean, just good lord,
Yeah, it's
it's
just a
crazy. I
teenage.
mean, it's
Yeah,
just nuts. I mean, the evil here. I mean, it's so funny that this is a comic book about demons and heaven and hell, and yet often the most evil people are humans.
yeah, yeah, and it's just a teenage kid who maybe doesn't know any better, making a stupid choice. But yeah, anyway, I'm not.
Yeah.
Maybe he was just saying that he was running away because Spawn was saying you're meat, and he's like, oh, he's trying to make an excuse. Oh, I thought it was just a pile of rags, But whatever. As he runs away, a figure literally pops into existence between Spawn and this kid who's running away, and grabs Spawn by the cape and keeps him from pursuing this kid, and says, "We need to talk, Hellspawn." And Spawn's taken aback, saying, I can't let him go. He blew me up. And this guy who's dressed in a tuxedo is like, don't worry about it. I snared his wallet. We can find him later. We have matters to discuss. So we turn the page. We get a bunch of exposition about the layout of Manhattan with Greenwich Village and Chinatown and Little Italy and uh, Little Ukraine, apparently. And again, I don't know, Orzakowski. I mean, that sounds like a Polish name to me, but maybe he's from Ukraine. Like, I don't know why he's choosing to tell the story of these Ukrainians, but the kid's driving in his car. Uh, Porsche McNeil is his name. Apparently, as some people see him driving by, there's some exposition about how he's young and he's brash and he doesn't have any respect. And even though he has a good job in an apartment downtown, he brings his laundry home for his mother to make and whatnot. And I don't know. Again, it doesn't. It's just all exposition. It's not really. It's clumsy. I'll just put it that way. It's a clumsy way to tell the story. And it continues on the next page where we get exposition from the three reporters that we've seen throughout the series, and they're talking about how there are some former, or there's some nuclear technicians from the former Soviet Union who are coming to meet with their global counterparts in an informal setting. There's a conference at New York's Columbia University, and it's being hailed as a sign that the Cold War has ended. Because remember, this is like 93, 94, and the Berlin Wall came down in what, 89. So it hasn't been that long since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we do see that one of the Ukrainians that was sort of criticizing the young kid for his lack of respect works apparently at the airport as a baggage handler. And again, it's very, very clumsy. But it appears that somebody on his team, these custom officials or whatever, have been bribed, and they don't really examine the luggage. They just stick a sticker on it that says inspected by U.S. Customs and kind of let it go. So um, again, the conference is at Columbia University, but these people have grown up in Russia. They've lived in Russia their whole lives, so they're finally in the United States. They head to Times Square because uh, the way that the writers put it is, decades of Soviet propaganda burned into their minds, and far from being a warning, it's a beacon, right? Like they want to go see the peep shows and the nudie girls and whatever. So they head to a strip club, and these four guys are sitting there and they're taking in the show, and they're talking about their knowledge and sort of lamenting um, that their work is not going to be really appreciated now with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they start talking some pretty crazy stuff while their KGB handlers, or the equivalent of the KGB handler, over are kind of keeping an eye on them. They're talking about working for Gaddafi and whatever. So one of the guys gets worried. One of the KGB agents or whatever gets worried, and he goes over to call in. Um, but we find out that this is exactly what these scientists wanted. They said, "You're right. The loud, crazy talk got one of our KGB shadows out of the way, and the other one's distracted by the girls taking their clothes off." And so it allows them to kind of hit the exit while they're not looking. Of course, the KGB handlers um, get worried. Three of the guys head for a cab. The third, who turns out to be Yusuf Volokov, goes running off to do something. We don't know what. So again, it's a lot of pages, and the art is good. A lot of pages, a lot of exposition, but not much happens. I mean, 4 pages just to have these guys come into the country and one of them kind of run off. Like, you can just put a sentence like, he slipped out of the hotel, or, I don't know.
Yeah.
It just seems like a lot of work to get this one guy separated from the rest.
Yeah, and
I
I
don't know.
wasn't entirely clear what was going on there. Is one of them trying to defect, or what are they like? What's the purpose? Or because they mentioned some crazy things about being they were frustrated with the fact that what's the point of creating nuclear weapons if you can't use them, and saying a lot
Yep.
of crazy things. So by implication, I think as the reader, we're supposed to infer from that they want to, I guess, take off or lose their handlers and explode a nuclear weapon on U.S. soil. Is that where this is going? I don't know. It wasn't entirely clear. It was just like you said. It was just all these characters often these characters in some of these issues have a propensity for stating extreme positions, and again, yeah, letting you know right up front what they're hinting as to what their evil plans are. And it's but this is I'm a little unclear. There was a lot of different things going on in this comic, all in one issue, and they didn't always. I'm not. It's not clear to me how all these little plot points line up together.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to sound like we're being overly critical of the creators here, but this is something that you kind of learn through experience. By writing comics, you get better at it. So again, following Morton to go to this issue, yeah, like I said, it just feels a little bit clumsy. So the scene then shifts. We're back at that place called the Overlap, and we get a little more exposition that tells us more about it. It's a reality that intersects all planes of existence, and it's supposedly the birthplace of magic. There are no spiritual or physical laws. Reality's elastic here. So it's inhabited by a bunch of powerful beings from millions and millions of worlds, a bunch of magic users, and they're having a meeting, and they're talking about a couple of different people. They're talking about Harry Houdini, and they're talking about Spawn, and they're referencing back to the atomic bombs. And one of them says, "I've been keeping an eye on the Earthians and their atomic fetish. So far, they haven't killed each other. And our last survey, way back when, a hell creature actually got blown up, but it was a bust, and we weren't really prepared. And so now uh, we've kind of got another plan, right? We've got a demon the latest Hellspawn, which we know to be Al Simmons, and he'll be at the place of the bomb going off. He'll be near Ground Zero, and we've placed an agent who's going to make sure that Al Simmons, that creature, will be where he's supposed to be, and then we'll have the information we need. Can Hellspawn matter survive an atomic blast? So again, just really strange. Like, well, these guys just wake up one day and say, we're worried about atomic bombs affecting us here in the overlap,
Yeah,
and
and
so they
are we also to believe that maybe one of the Ukrainian agents, one of those scientists that lost their handlers in the previous scene, is maybe one of the agents for these magic creatures in that occupy the overlap? Is that what maybe we're supposed to connect?
yeah, I don't know. They wake up one day and they're worried about atomic bombs, so they observed Nagasaki. They didn't get enough information then, so they wait for 50 years to go by, and now they're going to make sure that, yeah, that Spawn is at the place of the next bomb going off while these scientists are in America. So clearly they're maneuvering things around, and their agent, apparently their guy to get this done, is Houdini, right? So now we're going to have the conclusive test to determine if atomics can kill demons and in the process scatter infernal matter. And the best part is that persnickety pest, Houdini, is the agent on the scene. So even though apparently Houdini works for these guys, they don't particularly like him anyway. So we get a glimpse of a few of the different guys, and they're talking about Houdini and how he's been a pain, and they don't really care for him or whatnot. So we'll leave a pin in that for now, because as we turn the page, the scene shifts. We're back in Little Ukraine. We see the kid leaving his mom's apartment, the one that had set the bomb off earlier, and then went driving in his car, doesn't respect anybody. And there we see the guy that managed to give his KGB handlers the slip, and he says he's looking for Andrei Zelenko. So he tells him, okay, he's in his apartment, but I think he's probably in bed. And the kid takes off and goes to his electronics job, which is supposedly this great job. Well, it's Radio Hut, which I suppose is an analog for Radio Shack. I wouldn't exactly consider that like this great job, like the old Ukrainians made it out to. Now, don't get me wrong, working for Radio Shack in 1992 was a lot better than working for Radio Shack. Now, I don't even know if Radio Shacks even exist anymore in this day and age. But anyway, the kid apparently has the run of the place, and he must be pretty good with electronics himself, because when he heads into the employees only room, we see he's got a bomb, he's got dynamite, he's making a detonator. So this kid's able to get his hands on some pretty good stuff here, and he's apparently talking to a friend on the phone, and this is where we learn about him wanting to get back on these. He's like, I'll do whatever it takes to get rid of these bums by my place. Like, for whatever reason, this kid just has it in for homeless people. Maybe again a sign of the times, and some of the things that were going on in the early '90s with homeless being attacked and whatnot. So the scene then shifts again on the next page. We're back to Spawn and Houdini hanging out, and Spawn, I suppose it's supposed to be humorous, but this dialogue kind of lands flat. And Spawn saying, "There's no way I'm going to believe you're Harry Houdini." And he's like, "Well, you're a demon from hell." Spawn says, "Well, aren't you dead?" Well, aren't and Houdini's response is, "Aren't you dead?" Like, I don't know. It's supposed to be banter and go back and forth, I guess, but it doesn't have that. It doesn't have the right rhythm. There's just too many words here. So um, Houdini starts schooling Spawn, and this is, I think, what Rocky was referring to earlier. Even though it's Orzakowski, even though it's not McFarlane, here once again we have a guest writer who's adding a lot of information and a lot of lore to Spawn as a character. Because what Houdini does is he explains that, yeah, you're worried about like using up your power, but you have that symbiotic costume that's a part of you, and what you need to do is use the costume. Let the costume use its energy instead of you using your own energy. And so, as a way to demonstrate this, he yells out to Spawn, "Good God, quick, behind you!" And when he says that, the chain that goes around Spawn's waist like lashes out behind him. So I would kind of worry about that in a way. I mean, it's cool and it's demonstrating Houdini's point, right? That the costume has a mind of its own. Um, but couldn't anybody in a fight just yell out to Spawn, "Hey, watch out behind you," and his chain will go? You know what I mean? Like, it's not thought out that well, but it does. This chain does lash out behind him, and it hits a brick chimney and destroys it, and Houdini saying, "See, your suit expends the energy," and then he summons a bomb and says, "In the case of a bomb, you can you can sort of manipulate your suit and make it surround the bomb and control the blast, or in this case, the cape actually pinches the fuse and puts it
Yeah.
out." So yeah,
Well,
pretty cool. It's showing us
well,
just how
and Houdini
useful the
makes a
costume
good
can be.
point. I mean, his central point is, Spawn doesn't need to expend his own energy. That the
Yeah,
suit has its own energy, and that could hopefully slow down that clock that we've noticed at the beginning of the entire Spawn series, that where the clock is ticking down to zero, the more Spawn uses his power, the closer he comes to death. And so anything that Spawn can do to slow down that ticking clock every time he uses power would be helpful to him. So it's clear here that Houdini, despite being an agent of the overlap and seemingly working with them, he Houdini is also apparently a pawn of overlap, and yet he's there seemingly trying to help Spawn. So I'm still a little bit unclear as to Houdini's role in all of this. He's kind of a good guy, and yet he appears to have been sent there to move Spawn into position into a nuclear blast. Or is that what we're to believe? I'm
yeah, yeah.
I,
It's strange. It's almost like we have the overlap, and they're one faction. Spawn's on his own side, and Houdini's on a third side, even though he's working for the overlap. Like, yeah, it's
yeah.
unclear. But the other thing, and I do appreciate that Orzechowski does in his lettering. You won't see it in if you're watching us on YouTube because I redact all the words or whatnot. But he does emphasize words with bold. He makes them bold, and he also colors them blue as opposed to the black to emphasize certain things that he can do, like um, the ability to alter the perception of what's going on around him and use his costume. That word alter is highlighted.
Mm.
The word suit is highlighted. And then on the next page, he says the most important power you have is manifestation. Again, this doesn't use your power, you're using your costume to do it. And he encourages Spawn to think of a marble. He says, think of a marble, you know what it feels like, you know what it looks like, and think about your desire for success and let that desire for success fade to sureness. You know this will succeed. Activate your costume, reach out, grab the molecules that are floating free, and think of the marble and create a marble. And so Spawn concentrates, and what pops into existence, apparently through the power of the costume, again, not using Spawn's power, is a marble bust. And Houdini kind of chuckles and says, "Well, pretty close. We'll try again." But before they can, and uh, some kind of street punks show up on the rooftop, and they get in a fight with Houdini and Spawn. I'll talk about that in a second. But this is a huge. Like, I had no idea Spawn was this powerful. I had no idea that Spawn could anything he can think of, like nearly anything he can think of, like a solid object. He probably can't create like complex machines unless he knows in his mind how they are put together. I don't necessarily think he could manifest a car, let's say, or like a bazooka. But
Mm.
this is still a pretty powerful power. And
Yeah.
I had no idea he could use it, and it'll be interesting to see, is this just an Orzechowski thing, or do we see Spawn use his power going forward?
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, and it's almost implied that he's this powerful and he's not using a lot of energy being that powerful
Mm-hmm.
almost, which is interesting. And so it's almost as if I get a sense that we're in issue 19 here, and it's almost as if McFarlane is talking to these different writers, and they're sort of like slowly developing, and it's like they're slowly sort of tweaking Spawn's powers. It's like they never quite, because they had, bear in mind, we're finding this out at issue 19. You would have thought that, fine tuning the power set of Spawn would have maybe had been well established by now, but we're still getting all this extra bit of information and clarification and additive information regarding Spawn's powers. And it's again, it's interesting, and it definitely keeps the readers on their toes, and it makes me wonder if we're gonna between now and we're gonna be reviewing all these issues of Spawn moving forward. How much more will Spawn's powers change by the time we get to issue 100 or 200?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
So as these punks attack, of course, it's again exposition heavy. So we learn all their names in the course of two word balloons. Brains, Divvy, and Link. You take out the geek. I'll take the rich guy. You said it, Smokey. So we got four guys here: Brains, Divvy, Link, and Smokey. And of course, Link is the one swinging the chain around above his head. And
Yeah.
Spawn gives a chuckle and says, "All right, come and get me." Link, meet Chain. Chain Link. Oh, look at the funny pun as the
Yeah.
Link, the chain from his costume punches Link in the face and then in the gut, and he's down for the count. Meanwhile, with a wave of his hand, Houdini says, "Let your names speak your fate." So we're to believe that brains leaked out the side of his ear in the form of a rabbit. In the next panel are laying on the roof there. Divvy is split in half. He's divided up. His torso runs one direction and his legs the other. And Smokey vanishes in a puff of smoke. So Houdini apparently is pretty powerful as well. And Spawn kind of freaks out, like, what came over you? You mutilated those kids. But Houdini says, no, nothing. It was just some illusions based on their ludicrous nicknames. They'll snap out of it soon. And we see that they're all still okay, but somehow they're all tied up. And uh, but Houdini says, yeah, they'll be fine. They'll snap out of it. But you were pretty brutal with your powers. He goes, yeah, my powers, huh? How is it that everybody that meets me knows more about my powers than I do? And Houdini says, well, you'd know something about yourself if you tried some new stuff now and again. You know, you're limiting yourself by thinking of yourself as still being mortal when you're not. Um, so he says, but I can help you, right? Because I'm just a human. And where I come from, I play the role of an escape artist, but really, uh, most of my time is spent in the heart of magic in a place called the Overlap. And there, I'm a prankster and an annoyance. So that kind of gives us some clue for whatever reason Houdini likes to make a nuisance of himself when he's in the Overlap. So that kind of explains why the other people that we met in the Overlap don't really care for him. Um, but he goes on to tell Spawn, but I'm your ticket to knowledge, right? Like you stick with me and I can teach you a lot about, about your powers. And so then he says, speaking of tickets, let me take you to a show beyond your wildest dreams. And he holds up some tickets to the Columbia University, that atomic conference. So the pieces start to fall into place, right? Like we know that Houdini's role, what Overlap has, or assignment that the Overlap has given him, is to make sure that Spawn is at the place where the bomb is going to go off. We know that these Russian scientists are going to be there. We know that their luggage wasn't examined by the custom agents. So yeah, the pieces are starting to fall in place. Looks like some kind of bomb is going to be going off at this conference. So he tells Spawn, we got to make sure you're less conspicuous, though. Have you ever driven a Rolls before? So apparently, Houdini's going to take Spawn to this conference in disguise as his driver. So now at that moment, 3 stories below, we see the young Ukrainian kid is planting another bomb, and as it goes off, just as Spawn and Harry Houdini are about to jump into Houdini's car, which is this like old 1930s um, like sedan, Spawn goes, "Oh, it's that kid again. This time he's toast. I'm going to nail him. I'm going to nail that punk to the wall with his own bones." Um, and so Spawn goes running after him. And then on the last page of the series, we get a quick peek in at Terry Fitzgerald, Wanda, and Cyan. They're all asleep. We're told it's just past 5 on a Sunday morning when the phone rings, and Terry's being called in to work, and he's being called into that same conference, right? Because that one guy's missing, he's being called in, and we learn a little bit about Terry's role because we haven't known that much about it before. And he's like, okay, we're worried that this one Russian scientist is missing, and all of a sudden the powers that be think that they might have been able to smuggle in an atomic device. And then he agrees that the custom crew at JFK aren't all that they could be, but he's like, I'm not a field agent. My job is to read Russian, not speak it.
Yeah.
and apparently his boss is like, I don't care, we need you. And so Terry says, okay, I'll be there in an hour, but you explain it to my wife. And as he gets up to leave, he tells Wanda, sorry, I got to go. I have to go work overtime before my shift. And as he leaves, Wanda, because again, half asleep, she's like, did he say atomic device? And we're told in 2 weeks, we're going to see the atomic device. So that's the other thing. Apparently, this was coming out more than once a month, um, this 2-part series. So that's how it
Yeah.
ends a little bit on a cliffhanger. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I mean,
like. I,
yeah,
I,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say I like the cliffhanger because Terry Fitzgerald here, he's turning into sort of reminds me of the modern day Jason Bourne movies. You know, it's like he's the analyst. You know, he reads Russian. He's not a field agent. He's like Jason Bourne. You know, I'm just an analyst, but just like Jason Bourne, he gets pulled into the action. That's kind of what's happening here. And meanwhile, his wife Wanda is like sort of like the naive wife, kind of knows that he has an important job, but it's like knows it's dangerous. But you know, Terry Fitzgerald doesn't tell Wanda very much because he wants to protect her and what have you. And so I kind of like that aspect of this story. I kind of like that you know Wanda. You know, first it was Al Simmons, and he had a dangerous job that ultimately led to his death. And Fitzgerald Terry now, I mean, she seems to attract you know heroic men that are always in danger.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised actually to see this again. This first time we've seen concretely been told, hey, this is what Terry does. He's just an analyst. He's just a guy that reads probably Russian intelligence reports or whatever that they're intercepted. So he's not a field agent. And it makes me think for a couple things come to mind actually. First of all, how did he become uh, friends with Al Simmons? You best friends. You know, you would think Al Simmons is going to become best friends with somebody else who's a field agent who's he's working alongside. Not to say that you don't take analysts along on ops sometimes, but they don't actually go out into the field. You know, they might be back at the safe house or the headquarters or whatever you call it, the staging area. So that's interesting. The other thing that I think is Wanda may have married this guy specifically because he wasn't a field agent, having lost her husband who was a field agent. Maybe she thinks I'm marrying somebody whose job is a little bit safer. Turns out not to be the case. And maybe a third thing is the fact that Terry Fitzgerald is always, whether it's McFarlane or in this case Capullo, he's always drawn as a very fit and able-bodied looking guy. You would again think it gives that impression that he's a field agent, right? But we see in the next issue that's definitely not the case. So I agree with you. There's nothing like technically wrong with the comic. Is it over expositional? Yes, but so are some of the McFarlane issues, or most of the McFarlane issues we've read up to this point. Is the pacing a little wonky? Yeah. Is it a little clumsy? Yeah. But again, I don't blame Orzechowski's first comic the guy's ever written. Um, but again, I question putting this one after Grant Morrison. Like, put it after a McFarlane issue where the contrast is not so great. But yeah, but still interesting. And I have read the next issue already, and I do think that they tie up most of the things pretty well. So you'll have to decide that for yourself when we cover issue 20 on tomorrow's Spawn Daily.
Yeah,
But overall,
I haven't read issue 20 yet, and I'm wondering if and I'm the question I have at the end of this issue is I hope Harry Houdini. I like his character here. I find him likable. I hope he doesn't end up being a jerk in the next issue. I kind of like him. I hope that Harry Houdini is gonna probably has a maybe I'm hoping he has an agenda, an alternate agenda to maybe get one up on the some of the other magicians in the overlap that are looking forward to Harry Houdini dying. So I hope he doesn't die, but I guess I'll have to wait and see. So don't spoil it for me.
no, I definitely won't. And part of the reason I read the next issue was because this was kind of clumsy and I just had so many questions. I had so many questions, and so I was well, I need to redact the next issue, but I haven't even read it yet. Let me just read it real quick. So I read it as I was redacting, as I was doing the redactions for issue 20. So yeah, I have read it. It does reading these together. I almost think that they might, and maybe this is why they put them out, only 2 weeks apart, because they almost could have put it into one, like put it into one volume, because then it does make a lot more sense after you read the second part. Still kind of clumsy, but I think ultimately it works. And part of the reason it works, I can't say enough about Greg Capullo's art. Like he from the time he jumped on with issue 16, he is firing on all cylinders. Like this is Greg Capullo at the height of his powers. I almost like this Capullo art more than like his current style, because we talked about how styles changed even from this, to now, with his run on Batman, which is 10 years old at this, 11 years old. Well, it'll be 11 years old in September. But yeah, with the exception of, I think he does emotion and facial expressions a little bit better now than in here. But yeah, I mean, he's the glue that's holding this comic together for these guys who are writing and scripting a comic for the first time.
Yeah,
So
some of the things that stood out in this issue with Greg Capullo's art is just the level of detail. There are scenes here when he shows the downtown at the sex show and the stripper bar where the Ukraine nuclear scientists are there. It's actually quite well detailed. The background, the facial expressions, as you say, just the scene transitions, the way it pops off the page, colors are really great as well. The inks, I mean, it really it really works, and even the disparity in the colors from page to page, it's and for those watching on YouTube, I have them behind Jason and I as I'm talking about it. This really, it really, I can't underscore enough, as Jace, as you've said, that Greg Capullo really does. He brings his A game here, and of course, we know that he only gets better. And this was
yeah,
30 years ago, so kudos to him.
yeah, I agree, 100%. Okay, well, that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget that we'll be back tomorrow with issue 20, and all the previous issues are out there. 12 issues leading up to Christmas with 12 Days of Spawnmas, and starting at the first of the year, and we will continue. Haven't missed a day yet. We'll see how long we can keep that up. So just a reminder, if you're listening to us on the audio only side of things, make sure you do head over to YouTube at some point. Check out the amazing art by Greg Capullo by going to Rocky's channel. It's Comic Space Boom ! Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the episodes. Not only the Swan Daily, but the other content Rocky puts out. So ring that notification bell, like the video. All of that really helps. If you are checking us out on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to the Comic Source, be sure you head over to your favorite podcasting platform or app and just do a search for the Comic Source and subscribe so you don't miss any of the other content we have out there. So there is an interview that I dropped just earlier this week with the co-creator and writer of Kanto, David Boer, which was a lot of fun. My 10-year-old daughter joins me because she loves Kanto, and that was a really fun interview. And we have some pretty big names coming up before the end of the month. I'm not going to spoil them. I will just say one's a current writer on a DC book that we're really, really enjoying. And the other one is literally a living legend who has created dozens of characters in comics over the last 4 or 5 decades, who will be joining me to talk about the state of the industry, and we'll talk about some of his more well-known creations. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a creator that has been on the show before, but it's been 8 years since he's been on the show. And the last time I talked to him was at a con for about 10 or 15 minutes. We'll get a lot more time to leisurely discuss his career in comics coming up. So I'll be promoting the heck out of it once I dial in the date. So pay attention.
You're such a tease.
Well, once we stop recording, I'll tell you who it is. But
I know.
For all the rest of you guys, you have to wait. So hopefully not too long though, just a few weeks. So anyway, that's gonna do it for this episode, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to Comic Boom and Comic Source, and we will talk to you next time.
See you later.